269.
Bang. Like it. Looking good, John. Looks great.
Some days it's just easier to make a 7 turn into an 8 or a 9. Those are the cold, hard facts.
We got a wild market today, John. I'll tell you that. That's for sure. Woo.
Yep. And last week when you and I talked about whistling by the graveyard, boy, that afternoon we dropped like 300 from the morning to the afternoon, and then we reversed again. These are some volatile markets here, folks, and we'll get into that with the macro minute, the fantastic futures, and all of it here at the Rebel's Edge. We encourage you to share this with a friend. We've got some big news we're going to share with you shortly. That shortly has turned into longly, Pete, because we've been saying that since about, maybe April or May. We finally have some big news to share. So that's pretty cool.
Yep. Mid-November. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be hot, and we're pretty excited. But we're not going to give you the exact date because you never know. It could be flexible still. We'll see.
Well, let's dive into the macro minute today, Pete. Macro minute time, folks. I'm going to say that it's all about those retail sales today, Pete. Smashing through expectations. They looked for 0.27, and it came in at 0.7. So more than double expectations for September on retail sales. I don't know where we're all getting the money, but we're all spending it apparently.
Yeah, that's the amazing part, John. And that's the direction I would take with this retail numbers, because it's amazing to me the ability to still be flexible enough to have these retail numbers. And when we look at them, I can tell you one thing, John, credit card debt got over $1 trillion. And then total home household debt, it's only over $17 trillion. So people are willing to take some risks out there. So I think that's part of the volatility of these markets is, there is risk. People are willing to take it. And that's what's putting us into a position where these markets are getting a little wilder every single day.
Yeah. So whether you choose to view it as the plunge protection team that stepped in today, folks, or as part of fantastic futures, bang.
Fantastic futures.
I'm going to hit the fact, Pete, on fantastic futures that we spiked all the way up to, I think, almost 497 for the 10-year, which was a massive jump. And then we pulled back to 482. But take a look at where we closed last night, Pete. I mean, it's not exactly like 482 is down. It's just off of the day's high. And are we supposed to believe somebody's getting all bulled up about that? Because if they are, I got a couple bridges I'd like to sell them.
It is interesting. It's strange beyond words. I'm going to give you I'm going to go all the way back and go to the idea of metals. And how about this, John? Gold. Gold's up $100 in a very short period of time. 2 weeks, it's up $100. It literally got up to 1936, now 1937 today. So interesting to see that in 2 weeks. Silver on the other side as well, 21 to 23. So we've got a lot of different elements to this market and where we're going and what's driving it and everything else. There's everything from what we're seeing in the yields to the dollar to whatever you want to look at. There is something out there that's pointing to us that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And to your point, whether it's a plunge protection or whatever it might be, these markets are definitely more interesting, I think, than I've ever seen them. And I've actually heard quite a few folks commenting on that who've gone on TV saying, you know what, I haven't seen anything like this before. Well, join the club.
Yeah, well, it is incredible the speed at which these drops and then recoveries are happening, Pete. And I guess as long as we can just print money, maybe the plunge protection team can keep buying. But man, it's a real challenge, I got to believe. All right, let's dive in, Pete, to Goldman Sachs, because they came out with earnings. Third quarter earnings at Goldman basically were down some 33% from the 3.07 billion a year ago. They only earned 2.06 billion, which is a pretty big drop, wouldn't you say, Pete?
I'd say that's a pretty massive drop. It's probably why the stock was not trading all that well. John, the high of the year is somewhere around, I think we started the year, I should say, about 350, call it 348 is the real number. But, now here we are somewhere between, I don't know, you take your second and you'll be able to have a different number, but somewhere between, call it 311, 314, something like that. Now, the interesting part is we were all the way down to 303. And when I look at what the book value is, the book value of this company right now is about 303. So, John, we like to look at the banks a little differently than everything else. When we look at the PE of financials, not just banks, but financials, a lot of the time we try to look at, all right, what's the book? What's the book value of this thing right now? Well, it's exactly 1 times book. I would say this, they've done a lot of house cleaning. I don't know if they've done enough, but they've done quite a bit. They've had some issues for sure. It's at those levels right now, John, where I'm actually kind of interested right now in Goldman Sachs because of where they are, especially compared to like a JP Morgan. JP Morgan's done better for sure, but I look at Goldman Sachs and I say, you know what? From the standpoint of history, this thing is now trading at 1 times book. It's usually a time to buy it.
Well, Goldman bought Green Sky, Pete, back in 2021. So 2 years ago, let's say, roughly. And they paid $2.24 billion with a B. They punted it back out at, I think, 358 million, Pete.
Yep.
So whoever those clowns were at Green Sky, they did pretty damn well on that sale. They must have seen Goldman coming.
Yeah, I was going to say the clowns were wearing the nice suits from Goldman Sachs.
The clowns were wearing Brioni. We might have to make a meme about that, Pete. All right. How about this? We've got Wyndham Hotels. Out of the blue, somebody comes in and they say, we'll take you. And we'll take you at $90 a share, $49.50 in cash, and the rest in stock. That somebody, by the way, was Choice Hotels, CHH. So turns out Wyndham's not real interested in being acquired by its smaller rival. And Pete, you look at the brands that are part of this, I think I may have stayed at one of these brands over the years. And I'm not proud of that fact, but I also wouldn't be proud to announce that, oh yeah, I'm a frequent stayer at Choice Hotels.
Well, all that being said, with debt, this is what, about a $10 billion, $9.8 billion is what it is. So, you look at this one, John, you do scratch your head a little bit. And the reason that this is public right now is this has been a very private sort of a deal going on, and they just didn't want to do it. So because of that, they said, you know what, we're going to bring this thing public and see what the public thinks of this. Well, whether that was a good move or a bad move, we'll find out. But I'll tell you, when I look at this whole thing, it is interesting. It is interesting. I don't stay at most of those hotels either, John, you're talking about. But that being said, somebody is. They got some pretty good free cash flows out there. It's an interesting sort of a deal to become the massive smaller group, that they're trying to get themselves into that category. Will they have success with this thing? Will this even get over the finish line? I don't know if we've got all those questions answered just yet, but it's a very interesting thing, and it's causing a pretty big rock and roll in the market. And they're not the only hotels that are talking about doing something like this.
Yeah. And many times, folks, when you have a deal like this that the suitor rejects the deal, you frequently have somebody else step in. Is it private equity? I doubt it. But could it be Hilton? Could it be Hyatt? Could it be IHG? There's a number of them. I think it would be very difficult, Pete, for Marriott to step in and take a bite here because they already own so damn many brands. But just for giggles, folks, I had to cut out the first part. Just for giggles here, let's see. What do they got? Wood Spring Suites. Never heard of it. Suburban Studios. Never heard of it. Sleep Inn. Never heard of it. Quality Inn. Okay, I've heard of it. Never stayed there. Clarion, Cambria. That's their high end there, Pete. Cambria and Radisson. Okay, Radisson I've heard of because of Minneapolis connection with Kirk Carlson. But other than that, oh my gosh, they got a Roadway Inn, Econo Lodge. They've got a lot of names, but not a lot of real high end. But maybe these are much more profitable, Pete.
Yeah,
I haven't looked at the stock at all, but I wasn't interested in owning it either.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at Nvidia, Pete. NVDA, Biden administration says it plans to halt shipments to China of advanced artificial intelligence chips to basically not allow China to have the same kind of tech that our military has in particular. One of the few things that I'd probably agree with the president on is this one exactly, because if we think that that's such a significant edge, I don't want our potential competitors, Pete, to have that edge.
Right. And we're talking about Iran, we're talking about Russia, we're talking about China. I mean, all of those. So it's interesting. And then, of course, we had the reaction from Nvidia, which was just getting slammed early, John. It was down there, I think, now, maybe it was pre-market or whatever, but the lowest I was looking around and it said 424. So if that was the low, that was the low. But regardless of that, we're well off that low now. I mean, this thing hit down there and just started moving. And that sort of, I think, at least, is part of the reason why the NASDAQ was able to pull itself back up, because names like Nvidia that were getting absolutely slammed to the downside suddenly found some bidders. And here's why, John. When you take a look at Nvidia right now, take a look at what that PE is. And this is something that I've always talked about with Nvidia specifically, because it was stretched forever, right? I mean, it traded at as high as a 70 or an 80 PE stock in this world. And it's mature enough that maybe that's a little bit inflated, right? Well, it's no longer inflated down at these levels. So I was really interested in this one today. I was considering buying some stock and maybe selling some calls against it. I just couldn't make it all work. It didn't make quite the sense that I wanted it to make. But that being said, at these levels, and you look at the stock right now, where it's trading, as long as obviously China is a big buyer, but as long as they can continue to have that kind of growth that they've had over the last few quarters, this thing might be a little bit cheap right now. And I think it's definitely worth watching. We did have call buying the other day, but that was when the stock was higher. And some of those calls, I think, are going to start to move if this stock continues to move at the direction it is, because this thing is way off the lows of this morning.
Basically, Pete, we've got resistance right around 445. That's upside resistance. It was downside support this morning before this came out. So in other words, what was support, we slammed down to it. You expect it to bounce. If you slam through it, I always like to give it a day, Pete. If we stay under it for 445 level or so, if we stay under it for 2 sessions, that's going to become stronger and stronger resistance to the upside. So maybe being patient like Pete is a good thing right here. All right, let's do one more, Pete. Let's do NetScout. NTCT. This one down hard, double digits. It's basically cybersecurity to protect your digital businesses and so forth. And the revenue, well, the revenue for this quarter was a big miss. Now, top line they beat. I'm sorry, bottom line. Sorry. Bottom line they beat, Pete, but the top line number was not good, and their guidance going forward also not good. And they say it won't be good through probably 2024, at least on the call today. That's why it's down so hard.
Yeah, and this is one of those where it actually does connect the dots to the right decision and why the stock is down as much as it is. To your point, the earnings were actually decent, but it was the revenue, it was the sales, and those numbers not only missed, but as you mentioned, the projections look terrible. The outlook does not look good. They're slowing on their order conversions. All of that is a factor that's going in right now. Makes sense why the stock is getting beat up the way it is. At some point, because of the fact when I'm looking at it, John, they have a lot of positives. At some point, I think it's probably worth looking at this name. It isn't now, and it might not be for a quarter or two, but this is definitely one of those. You're in the right spot, cybersecurity, but you've got to win. You've got to make sure you get those sales. And that's something that obviously they're projecting right now, not going to be nearly as well as they thought. But at some point, if they start to gain any kind of momentum, this is a stock to keep your eye on in that field.
Well, Pete, I thought I'd just point out for people that don't follow it as close as you and I, that Palo Alto Networks is more or less one of the leaders in this space. Now, their PE is 205. NetScout is a PE of 26, which, you could look at that a bunch of different ways. But one of the ways that I would look at it is Pete's probably right about this one being a buy, very close down here. Now, it's traded 6 times normal volume turnover so far today, Pete. It bounced pretty hard at a new 52-week low of 21.15. And I got to think, Pete, that if you're patient and you buy it here between 22 and 23, like Pete said about Nvidia, maybe selling some upside calls against it, you're going to see a pop, I think, to 26 and a quarter over the next quarter at least, Pete. So I'd say it's 12%, maybe even 15% upside before you run into any resistance. And that would be, I think, an interesting trade in the cybersecurity space, NTCT.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what, folks? We've got a big webinar tonight with Pete. And that big webinar is going to be covering stock only trading is not an option. This is our new book. It's not an option, by Pete and me and the gentleman that you see on your screen there along with us. That's Bill Johnson, one of the head of education over at Market Rebellion, a brilliant guy. And he is going to be working with Pete to basically bring you guys some insights into why stock trading is not an option. Because with option trading, you define your risk on entry. Some people say, yeah, but what about time decay? What about it? Why not capture that time decay? If you're somebody that really wants time decay and doesn't understand how to do spreads, you can take advantage of that by, like that trade I just talked about with NetScout, buying the stock at, for instance, 23 and selling an upside call against it. Now you're collecting that time decay premium and so forth. That won't be the only thing they talk about, folks, but you can register right on the website, marketrebellion.com. You can register. If you just scroll down a little, you'll see how you can register for that free webinar tonight. And then Pete and I, of course, will be in Orlando on the 30th of October to do our launch of that book.
Yep. Pretty excited about that. Pretty excited about tonight. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Bill Johnson, for people who don't know who Bill is, he's probably one of the very best, if not the very best, when it comes to the educational side of derivatives, of the options markets. He's amazingly, he's got patience. He goes with a good method of how he speaks and everything else. I just think it's something that it gives people the opportunity to understand options that much better. And let's be honest, that is where the growth is in the market. We talk about buying stocks based upon what their growth potential looks like. Well, we don't just look at the potential of the growth of options, but you and I, John, we've been watching them go from 2 million a day to 10 million to 20 to 30 to 40. This year, averaging 45 million contracts a day. So I would say we're in the midst of some pretty damn good growth in the derivatives world.
Absolutely. And I agree 100%. It's worth your time, folks. And if you sign up for it, even if you get busy and can't make it, they send you a copy of the recording that you can watch at your leisure. So check it out. All right, Pete, how about a little sports for the weekend?
All right, let's start off with Pat McAfee, John. This guy is entertaining, if nothing else. And I'll tell you what, he's one of the biggest in the industry. And you and I both know that. And then he got that big contract from ESPN. But there's been a recent kerfuffle going on with Pat. And the kerfuffle really is this. He got called out not too terribly long ago from somebody, and then he addressed it immediately, which, of course, Pat would do that. But, he got in trouble with somebody who said, well, you really can't pay your guests. That's just not okay. Well, you and I both know that that's actually sort of a ridiculous comment, but I think Pat actually answered it perfectly, John. Now, let's understand this. It really is about Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers did get in a little bit of trouble. He had a 12-year deal with State Farm, right? He did those commercials. He was getting paid by them, by the way, to do those commercials, $3 million a year. And because of some of his opinions and some of his commentary about COVID and so forth, they got rid of him, right? Well, he's been part of Pat McAfee's show for quite some time now. And Pat finds him to be interesting and a guest that brings in a heck of a lot of people, right, John? I mean, that's the goal of what people are doing in podcast, right? You want to have viewers. So whether you like Pat, don't like Pat, like Aaron Rodgers, don't like Aaron Rodgers, Aaron's not the only one. But here's the deal. Here's the real numbers behind this whole thing. So Pat McAfee said that but not too terribly long ago, his company was worth somewhere between $2 and $5 million, the Pat McAfee show. Now it's worth $500 million. So here's what Pat said about that, by the way. Pat gave those numbers. Those aren't coming from me. Those are coming from Pat. He says, you know what? I think you got to pay people. I think you give them, for their time, their efforts, everything they're doing. Oh, by the way, you might even have a bonus in there, because if it's jumping even more so than you expected, then maybe they deserve a little bit more of the pie. And that's what Pat was talking about. So 242 million views in the first 4 weeks of the show this year. Not so bad, right? People are there for 45 minutes, John, as far as watching the show consistently. And people, that's a big number, actually. It's a long show, but that's still a big number. 82% of its audience is somewhere between 18 and 44 years old. I would say that Pat's doing a lot of things right, and he is rewarding those that are part of him, right? I mean, he's got his regulars that are on set. He's also got a heck of a lot of regulars who are coming in as guests. And those guys deserve that money, because you know what? People are tuning in to hear what Aaron Rodgers has to say, whether you agree with them or not. You could be on this side and say, you know what? Aaron's an idiot. Well, okay, but you're watching. Or you think Aaron's pretty damn funny and he's entertaining and he's got his own opinions and he does what he does. And that's the other side. So I don't know. I look at this whole thing and I just think, Pat's figured it out. And I don't know if the rest of these guys have all figured out that when you want to build your company, this is how you build that company. And that's exactly what he's doing. And he's not going out there, John, saying, well, geez, Aaron, of course you've got your doctorate in this kind of medicine or anything. I mean, he's not trying to go there. He's just asking his opinion. So I think that Pat McAfee, he's got some people on him. I think they need to get off his back.
Or, there with very few exceptions, Pete, there is no bad publicity.
Right.
So they just made him richer by arguing that he pays his guests and so forth. Hell, you and I were paid well to be on CNBC, a lot better than most of the people that are probably on some of those shows. I shouldn't really talk too much about that, but I think you're right, Pete. I mean, Lincoln freed the slaves. If you're somebody, and a lot of somebodies would pay to be on TV, and they do, folks. How do they pay? Do they pay CNBC? Do they pay Fox or CNN? No. But what they do is they pay a PR firm to get them onto these shows. So let me see, Pete, which one do you think would deliver more value? Somebody who's paying to be on TV, again, paying through a PR firm or whatever, or somebody who's being paid because their opinions are so interesting, because their insights are so good? I think it's the latter, not the former. So do I think all guests should be paid? No. But there's a reason, for instance, that Mark Cuban, who's a brilliant guy, is only probably on CNBC. Maybe he's on once every 2 months, Pete. Maybe. Let's say probably 6 times a year or something. Meanwhile, his fellow shark, Kevin O'Leary, is on a variety of programs all the time and almost always being paid. So I think if somebody's got a valuable opinion and their time is worth something, you pay them. That's just the way the world works. And if people don't like that Pat has been so successful at doing this, well, that thing that we used to call a dial on the TV, now it's a button, click it. Move over to another show if you don't like it. But like Pete said, if 240 million people have watched this guy over the past few months, I'd say he's pretty popular and he must be doing something right.
He's doing something right. There's no doubt about it. You know who else is doing something right, John, is college football. And I'm going to segue this way. Last weekend was great. Why is it great? Because we had the game of this year so far. It was number 7 Washington against number 8 Oregon up in Washington. Unbelievable atmosphere, unbelievable stadium that's sitting right on the water. I mean, it was just perfect, right? And it even had a lot of drama because, you can argue either side of it, and I'm not here to do that. But, the Oregon coach made a lot of difficult decisions. He made decisions on 4th down, whether or not to go for it or not. Had a lot of people pushing back saying, hey, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have been doing that. Well, whatever. But the reality is it was one heck of a football game, 36-33. It was a great game. It was a lot of fun, a lot of entertainment. But here's the thing. We might have another one this week, John. I think it's going to be pretty fun. You've got Penn State, undefeated, 6-0, going to Ohio State, undefeated, 6-0. And this could be a very monstrous tell for the rest of the Big Ten of where the top really is. We already think Michigan's probably number one, right? But we really don't know about a little bit further east. You start looking at Ohio State and Penn State and which one's a little bit better. Here's the part that I didn't know myself, John. Drew Allar, the quarterback for Penn State, has yet to throw an interception this year. He's played in 6 games. Now, that comes with a bit of a caveat. Penn State has not played anybody. I mean, they did play Iowa. I'll give them that. I mean, they're in the Big Ten. But you look at the schedule so far, they really haven't played anybody. And we all know they're pretty damn good, but we don't really know how damn good till this weekend. Meanwhile, you've got Ohio State. Now, they haven't played a whole difficult schedule yet. Both these two schools have it in the back half, right? But I'll tell you what, you got 2 quarterbacks, but between them, John, they've thrown 1 interception. That says a lot about just the ability, the accuracy. You've got Marvin Harrison's son, who's been unbelievable. There's all these great athletes out there. I don't know what's going to end up happening in the game because we just don't have enough to measure it upon to see what that's going to look like. Ohio State's at home. I probably would go with Ohio State in the game. But either way, I think this could line up to be the next game that's great. And then next weekend, these games get even better because as people do get those losses, now it gets interesting to see, all right, well, who's undefeated, who's going to stay undefeated, and who's going to be just 1 loss, not 2. Notre Dame stumbled, but Notre Dame came back. They absolutely slaughtered USC, which was amazing. And that quarterback that the whole world thinks is the best quarterback in the world suddenly might not be. And there are others up in that Heisman run too. So what do you think? Are you pretty damn excited about this Penn State, Ohio State?
I think that is the game. You nailed it. That is going to be a smash mouth football game. There's some finesse, but it's mainly just power against power, Pete. Mm-hmm. As far as that Notre Dame game, they had 11 tackles for a loss against USC. Mm-hmm. I've not seen an offensive line just get tossed around like that. Kudos to Notre Dame for that one. And even though they've got 2 losses, which means there's no way they're in the playoff hunt, but they will be in a big bowl game. Their fans follow them like crazy. So whoever gets them will be lucky from a financial standpoint, because like I say, their fan following is probably second to maybe Nebraska, Pete, as far as, and maybe Wisconsin. Those 2 teams in the Big Ten really pull fans to every single game. But as far as interesting stuff that's going on, I thought that it really was interesting that Oklahoma and Ohio State are still so highly thought of, and they should be. But the reason that Georgia, Pete, is kind of sliding is I think some of us are worried about that tight end as well. Yeah. If you've got Bowers out, as big a game changer as he is, maybe he's got a great backup, Pete. But this is a tight end that runs 4.5 or 4.45, that's 235 pounds, 6'4". He can line up at wideout. Mm-hmm. And so that gives defenses fits. But this is really difficult to see Georgia still undefeated. But yeah, they took down Vanderbilt, big whoop. But the tight end got hurt. That's all everybody can talk about in that game. Bowers got hurt. So I was surprised to see him drop 4 places in at least one of the polls that I follow, Pete. That's how valuable they think Bowers is.
Yeah. Yeah. And Georgia this year just looks a little bit different. They're not quite the Georgia that they've been. And I think the eye test says, makes that statement. Here's the other thing on Penn State that I'll just go back to that game real quick. Penn State's defense. Now, like I said, they have played nobody. They really have, because Iowa, the only thing Iowa has is a defense, but they don't have much offense. So the fact that the defense went up against a very poor offense, that's why they won 31-0 in that game, and they ended up blowing them out. But I'll tell you something, John, they're the number 2 or number 1 defense in just about every single category. So we'll find out if that defense is real, because Ohio State's offense looks a lot different than UMass and all these other schools that they've been playing. So it's going to be a pretty interesting battle. Game Day will do a great job with it. Pat McAfee and those guys, we just got done talking about it. If you've never watched the Friday before the Saturday game day, it's worth a watch because they're on campus and that same crowd that sits in his office is there. And it is not only hilarious, but a lot of eye-opening things that they're talking about and this, that, and the other. They get a lot of great guests. It's really a lot of fun. That game's going to be a big one.
Yeah. Well, a game that I was at this weekend, Pete, Colorado versus Stanford. Colorado jumped out to a 29-zip lead at halftime, just crushing them. And then, like so many teams do, Pete, they went into a shell in the second half. And boy, just to ask the Atlanta Falcons how well that worked out against the Patriots in that Super Bowl. It doesn't work out so well. If you're not getting first downs and keeping your defense off the field, and instead you're making mistakes, getting penalties like crazy, that's why they lost. That and number 13 for Stanford, who played the game of his life. I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody having a bigger game than that guy, especially since most of the time Travis Hunter was covering the guy, Pete.
Yeah. It's amazing because everybody's talking about Travis Hunter, always the best thing ever. Travis Hunter is the best thing ever. And all of a sudden a receiver on one of the worst teams in the Pac-12 lights him up, right? And not only does he light him up, he lights him up despite the fact that there were a lot of cheap shots in that game. There was a lot of penalties in that game. And all those penalties were coming from the other side of the ball from Colorado. So if they don't decide that they want to be disciplined, we talk about it in the financial markets all the time, but if they don't want to be disciplined on the football field, they're going to be in for some more problems, John, because literally this year, Stanford was the bottom, along with Cal, of the Pac-12. Well, if they're losing to the bottom, that says a lot. And it says a lot about their own discipline and how they're focused.
Yeah, you can't overcome 100 and some odd yards in penalties, Pete. And they almost did, even though it went to overtime and then double overtime. And Shakur threw that interception on third down in the second overtime to basically put Stanford in a position to just kick a field goal to win it. But they didn't. This is just one of those things where you can't be undisciplined. And to give Travis Hunter a little bit of a break, though, the dude played both ways.
Yeah.
Number 13 for Stanford is a great player, but he didn't play both ways. And I don't think he could cover Travis Hunter. And some of his catches, Pete, were the kind of circus catches that you just, like an Odell Beckham kind of thing, where the ball comes down over the top in between the guys, and he basically pulls it off of Travis Hunter's head or whatever. I mean, a circus catch, give him all the credit in the world. The kid played great, but man, you don't play, you don't go into the game thinking you're going to get catches like that.
That's for sure.
All right. Well, we're going to be back tomorrow, folks, 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'd also remind you the webinar tonight, it's not an option, is right there on the homepage of Market Rebellion. Just roll down that homepage a little bit. Look for that. You can sign up. It's free. And you also get, of course, access that'll be sent to you through a video. So thanks for joining us. Back at 1 p.m. tomorrow, Eastern time.